I see that people mostly have the best of intentions for each other. That doesn't translate into effective communication.
Married couples, they love each other. They want the best for each other. But how could they really almost go to the point of like beating each other when they disagree?
What if everybody masters the art of evolving people?
Many people are successful, but why are they unfulfilled? Because there's some compromise going somewhere.
Sari ga ma ga ri pa ma ga ri da pa ma ga ri sari ga ma ga ri ni sa. The A&H Podcast.
We're continuing today on a very special question that Harini asked while we were driving. Do you remember the question, Harini?
Much of human communication is through words. We're having conversations. Non-verbal communication, there's verbal communication. And I see that people mostly have the best of intentions for each other. But that intention often doesn't translate into effective communication. And then there's just tons of conflicts and bad will and all the sadness and the whole bunch of negative emotions, with even though people have good intentions for each other, like in a family. How often do we see so many disagreements, heart full of bad feelings for each other, but they have the best of intentions for each other? I mean, they're blood related. And how can humans be doing it so wrong? Don't manage to get that intention to translate.
I remember once reading the story of Babel, which said like, the mankind was actually building a tower that was reaching up to like the outer space. Because their intentions were not right, that God came down and like confused the language of humankind. And for a long time, I thought that just meant like one person speaks English, another person speaks Arabic, and another person speaks Hebrew, another person speaks Tamil, and so on. But now when I think more about, when I look at what's happening with individuals, and especially the case that you pointed out, especially when you see like married couples, they love each other. They want the best for each other. But how could they like really almost go to the point of like beating each other when they disagree? So what must be going on? And it looks more people actually have a different language. Every individual has a different language than the other individual. So we may think, oh, we all speak this mother tongue, Tamil, or we all speak English, or we all speak Spanish, and so we understand each other. But what we don't realize is every human has a different vocabulary, different meaning for the same word, different emotional responses for the same sequence of words. Computer may interpret a particular statement in a particular way. For human beings, we all don't interpret the same statement the same way. We may interpret it based on our bias, and we may interpret it based on what level are we paying attention to, and also our mood at that point in time. So it's like literally not only do we have our own language, but our own language changes based on how we feel at that moment. So I think there is this need to understand that language and the art of tell, when people speak with each other, in itself is not very syntactic oriented. It's more of an unconscious process. When we meet someone, we have a vibe of that person. We think about what is this person trying to convey. We understand intent even before words are spoken. And even when we speak, there are some words that we mark out unconsciously, emphasizing the intent in our communication. It's like, if I have to give you an analogy, like if you see a forest from above with a satellite, and if there are certain trees that stand out as tall trees, and if they form a pattern, then it doesn't matter. Even if there's a crowded bunch of trees, from above you can actually see a pattern. If someone just planted tall trees than the regular trees in that area to mean a particular pattern. And the interesting thing is, humans, when they speak, they unconsciously do this. They mark out specific words, by either going softer, or their tone goes down, or they go louder. And these are micro shifts that most people don't recognize consciously, but unconsciously we actually emphasize on it. This is how complex unconscious communication is. And as humans, we're not just communicating consciously, we're also communicating at a different level, at an unconscious layer. So there's this incredible complexity when it comes to communication. But as a society, we start with the assumption that you and I speak the same language. A lot of confusion can be avoided if we come to terms that people don't speak the same language. People, you could say what you say, but people are hearing something very, very, very different. Interpreting it differently. And also, the most horrible assumptions are the ones that are based on facts. So you see something and you notice something. Let's say someone comes home tired. Now, the person might be coming home and let's say they're like dragging themselves. The person may be dragging themselves because they're really tired, they worked really late, or they might be dragging themselves because, they're drunk. Now, let's say this is the mother of a teenage son. In certain cases, during exhaustion, people can appear like they're high on drugs. Now, if you're just paying attention to it without validating it, you're likely to make an assumption, which is incorrect. So, and such an assumption is based on a direct observation. You saw that person walk differently. Let's say you're talking to someone and their voice goes up, pitch goes up, or they look up. And now you go, oh, their eyes are not looking at me. Now that's a very good observation. But that body language means different things to different people. So now when someone makes an assumption saying, oh, he's lying, she's lying because they're not looking at me, and they're basing that based on a very sensory observation, those are like circular beliefs. Those are like real prisons because people can be stuck in it and believe what they think or what they assume about someone is absolutely true because it's coming from a careful observation. What people have to learn is that everybody has their own body language book. Everybody has their own vocabulary. Everybody has their own language. The two words don't mean the same thing to any two individual in the planet. And still, we are so intelligent and so capable that we can navigate through and still make meaning, make sense, and understand each other.
Then what is the foundation of the disagreements between people, and how do two people or three people manage to drive each other crazy? What must be going on, right?
They understand the intentions of each other completely wrong. Well-meaning people have a conflict with each other. They understand the intentions completely wrong. And sometimes and often also people mistake capability challenges for character challenges.
It's possible that most people may not even be aware of their intention for the other person. But so what level are they operating at? Are they operating at the level of how they feel at that point in time? And how do you bridge this gap between the intention that they truly have that they may or may not even be aware of versus, the feeling that they may be having in their body? Like they could just be upset that something happened, or they could have misunderstood something, or they're too impulsive, too quick to come to a conclusion which may not be true. And like you said, it could be based on a fact, but a wrong assumption made.
And also you're pointing out at a very different problem. You're pointing out at the problem where not someone else is misunderstanding your intention, but you yourself don't know your intention.
Yeah.
Intuition and intention are different things. Because when you care for someone, you intuitively know you want to stop them from doing something. Let's say a wife really gets upset when her husband, let's say, is going and hanging out with his friends. Now you might intuitively know, oh, let's stop him. But you might, it can come from different spaces. Maybe the wife feels insecure, or maybe the wife feels he's not spending time with me. Or maybe for some women, they may intuitively feel that company is going to corrupt my husband. That company is going to make him a loser. The company is not putting good things in his head. So the action is the same. The intuition is the same. Let's stop him. But the intention is different. And a lot of times people intuitively know what to do. They don't know why they want to do what they do. Because that's the thing with unconscious things, is that we are a patterning machine. We pattern things and we intuitively know something, but we don't know why we know it, and sometimes we don't know why we want to do what we do. We just know, oh, okay, let's try and not allow him to go today. It's a simple example, but a very relevant one. A lot of times people intuitively try and tell someone, do this, don't do this, but they don't know what's their intention for asking a person to do that.
That's a big gap, right?
It is a big gap.
To not, for the person themselves to not know the intention.
Yeah.
But when they ask the question why, and they, let's say they ask themselves the question, why am I behaving this way? Or why do I think it's important for me to stop this person from doing ABC? The reason that they come up with, how accurate do you think it could be? Is it sufficient to really bring out the deeper intention of the person engaging in that action?
John Grinder and Richard Bandler, they did some work based on the famous linguist's work, Noam Chomsky. And while they were doing this work, and also they were modeling very well-known clinical psychologist and hypnotist called Milton Erickson. And while modeling this person, they found out that if you can connect two facts and add a because in between, and even though those two don't make sense, people are likely to believe it. And then once they published this, and it got translated into so many sales training. And recently, just like 10, 15 years ago, someone did a study where they sent a group of people to join a line midway. And the group went and just said, hey, can you please excuse me? I want to stand here. And most of them rejected them. They said, please go stand in the back of the queue. But when the same group repeated the experiment and this time said, can you help me join this queue because you're close to the counter? And or because, the line is really long. Now, close to the counter or line is really long doesn't really make any sense as to why you should allow someone to come into the line. But because they structure the sentence in a particular way, which is, can you allow me in, which is a request, because you are close to the counter, connected to a fact. The unconscious, because remember, we're making these decisions not by thinking through it. These are things we do fast. But the unconscious mind goes, oh, okay, he makes sense. Come, let him in. And most people actually allow these researchers into the line, to cut the line, which they didn't. And all that changed is that formation of two sentences with a word because. Now, in linguistics, you call this as causal operator. It creates the illusion that one causes the other or one justifies the other. So what happens when people say because, it's not necessarily a real reasoning. It is just something that feels like reasoning. One of the studies that they did is they got many subjects they found a way to induce chemically a separation between the left brain and the right brain. And you know that the right ear is connected to the left brain and the left ear is connected to the right brain. So what they did is they induced chemically a separation between the left brain and right brain temporarily for the test subjects. And they got the test subjects to wear a blazer and sit down in a chair. And after creating that separation, they would go and whisper in one side of the ear, saying, would you please get up and remove the jacket? So the test subject would get up and remove the jacket. Then they'd come to the other side and whisper to the other ear, because now there's a separation. Both the hemispheres don't know what really happened. So they come to the other side and they whisper to that ear, why did you remove the jacket? Now, most times people made up answers. They said, oh, because it's hot here, because I'm waiting too long, because I just wanted to stand up and stretch. So when people say, I did this because XYZ, they don't necessarily mean to say what actually happened. They're just saying something that makes sense to them. And it doesn't have to be the real intention. In that experiment, the real intention was because your researcher with whom you agreed to cooperate asked you to get up and remove the jacket. But none of them
But nobody said that?
Nobody said that because the instructions came from one ear, so the other brain was acting. And they chemically separated the communication between these two brains. So when they whispered to the other ear, this brain was didn't have that information.
So it just made up a reason.
It just made up a reason. And often when we say why, and you could see this with a child, child comes late from school, child does something, and you say, why did you do that? Because, and the child starts thinking about a reason. There is a more precise way to get your intention, which is instead of leaving or asking a vague why, which can take any direction, get to the intention by being very specific and intentional about it. Ask, what is the intention? What do you think you're going to achieve by doing this?
What I found very interesting in the initial days of learning linguistics from neuro-linguistic programming and all of that was this concept called trans-derivational search.
Yeah, that's a very interesting word. I have to break it down for the audience. It's trans-derivational search. It's again, Noam Chomsky coined it. The founders of neuro-linguistic programming adopted it into their work. And it comes from the idea that there is a surface structure to what we say, and then there's a deep structure. So when we speak something, the brain is translating. It's like, imagine if you can talk to a computer and a computer can code in Python or C or Perl or any other computer language for yourself. So imagine you can tell a computer, create a software or a website that'll do this, and it creates the code. So that's the equivalent of what happens in a deep structure. So when we talk, hey, there's there's a mic over here, the brain goes, there's an object that is in this particular location, and it is called the mic. The function of it is, and it retrieves all that data, and that's called the deep structure. So the idea is when you ask a question or when you talk, that surface layer is getting converted to a much deeper syntax. And it doesn't stop the moment you get the first answer. It keeps understanding what are the different interpretations of the surface structure. So for every surface structure, you have several deep structures. And that's why it's a search, because some questions, they don't stop for days, weeks, and even months together. You may have forgotten about it consciously, but it's like a probe. A search is started, and then your unconscious is just working and working and working until it feels satisfied. The most relevant set of answers or data points for that question have come forth into your conscious mind.
So how do you learn to ask purposeful questions? Is there like a checklist of like 25 questions that I can learn by heart and ask everybody, purposeful questions like that? Like, what's the art? How do you get to asking purposeful questions which are useful in reducing the gap between intention and communication?
The simplest hack to do that is to have a direction. Is your question taking you to dig the past, or is it projecting it towards the future?
Which one is better?
Projecting towards the future is more useful, because when people try to understand the past, it's more complex than it may appear. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, or finding like a lost pearl inside an ocean.
Like oversimplifying.
Yeah, it's oversimplifying it. You're absolutely right. What is more useful is like, okay, what is your intention for stopping me? Is more purposeful, because now you're asking about the present. Instead of 5 years before when you stopped me, what were your self-doubts? Or, because, and also it's very important to make sure you don't impose your own content. Like, you could say, okay, when you stopped me, what was your intention? What made you do it? Versus what were your doubts or self-doubts, or what inferiority caused you to stop me? There is an assumption that you're imposing on the other person. The lesser imposition from you, the more directional it is towards the future. And also the information that you actually want to solve or create a win-win. The reason you want to understand someone's intention is because you want to satisfy their intention while satisfying yours. The idea is not, oh, I understand your intention. Oh, so noble. Oh, you don't want me to go and hang out with these people because you think I'm going to get like corrupted by them. Okay, now how do we satisfy that with the with the intention that I want to have some stimulation and fun in my life.
So you have your intention, I have my intention. Now, how do we marry the two?
So you need to know why you are asking that question. What is your intention? What do you want to achieve? What is the outcome? What are you aiming at? A lot of times people don't aim at anything. They are just like, they want to just accuse someone. And I think the biggest challenge for people is the blame frame. You're trying to accuse someone, you're trying to point it on someone, you're trying to pin someone instead of aiming for a solution. If you aim for a solution, you're likely to find it. And often when, couples fight, they are like so busy, like you did this, you did that, but not necessarily stop and ask, okay, what are we aiming for? Let's say you're right. What do we aim for? What do we want to happen differently in the future? That is the key, Harini.
So, what are some things stop people from being able to accurately express themselves? Like, and I think a lot of people struggle with that, right? Like, they don't say certain things immediately and then they let it pile up and pile up and pile up. And that again happens a lot in families. So, what do you think are some dynamics that go on?
Yeah,
That,
I like the word some dynamics, because I was just about to say that like you can't ever be specific about these things, because and I hope that our viewers understand that. And I would never want to give a generic suggestion, because a lot of times you read self-help books and you're like, when someone is not expressing, it means they're self-reserved, or it means that they're hiding the truth, or whatever reasons they give is only a statistics, is at best what is true until that moment. Maybe the person you're speaking to has a different language, has a different vocabulary, has a different way of relating to the world, and maybe none of the statistics apply to that person. So there are things that we can explain from our past experiences, from what has been the some of the intentions for people to not communicate clearly. But we have to remember that for every single person, it's going to be different. And it's up to you to make sure that you are getting to the real intention of what is going on with each individual. For some people, it has been a capability issue. They want to communicate clearly, but they're just so confused in the moment. Or they can't be in the moment, they can't be in the present, they're thinking about something else at that time. For some people, they want to hide. They want to hide their intentions because their intentions are not clean. And sometimes they want to hide the intentions because they think it might hurt a person.
messy power dynamics. It
Power
could be that
dynamics.
one feels oppressed and they're
Yeah.
unable to say what they want to say, and then they let it build and build and build.
Yeah.
And the dangerous thing is that when it finally bursts, it's like all the time when it was cooking, with where they weren't, well, like incident one happens, incident two happens, incident three happens, they are unable to express, they're unable to express. And the trans-derivational part is where the unconscious is just making all kinds of meanings and assumptions. And a lot of times, you spoke just a while ago as to, it may not even be an issue with the character of a person or the nature of a person. It could just be a simple capability gap. And and somewhere it just gets escalated to thinking that the person is a bad person, or
Yeah.
they have bad intentions, or see them well, or there's no respect, and all kinds of judgments that people come up with. And it's crazy how quickly it escalates for people, right? From And they may not even have started from that space, because I don't think people form those kind of opinions within like a few seconds. It takes a while. For well-intentioned people, for good-intentioned people, we see this happen, in teams and in families. It's like there must be a whole series of things that leads to them allowing it to escalate to that point.
It reminds me now that you speak about it that there was a girl who was in love with her husband, and she had these filters on, so all the imperfections she would not see. And it's a rosy marriage. People ask, how's your marriage? Oh, it's beautiful, it's from a fairyland. And one day they divorced, and then looking back, she talks about how every day was horrible. I don't think she was lying. Her creating a filter. And I think human beings can do that. They can create a filter. They can look past some things. So when she has a filter for, oh, he's the most loveliest person, it automatically rejects any information about all the things that annoy, that break. But once it crosses a threshold, the filter breaks, and then a new filter comes in of every day was horrible. And this is not at all uncommon. When you deal with divorces like we've met so many people who are going through divorce and separation, and we meet them, and you could see them have written love letters and diaries where it's the rosiest of times. And then afterwards, that person is like the most evil person. Both are not true. They're both corrupted information, and that is the state of human neurology. And so we always need to have mechanisms by which we validate our experiences, we validate reality, and we keep things real. And that doesn't mean that you become like a psychopath who's analyzing every moment and not living in the moment and ruining everybody's time. It just means that maybe once a week, once a month, you need to have a secondary way to validate how things are going. This is not just true about a relationship, it's true about your business, it's true about career, it's true about your health. You always need more than one channel to validate. So I really get really worried if someone has only one way to know something about anything. All those people who only rely on their blood report, and they cannot for the life of them calibrate if they feel different in their body, or all those people only rely on the watch to eat, they can't understand if there's something going on in their stomach. Now we are coming towards the type of timeline in human evolution where people are becoming less and less and less aware of what their body is saying. So you could have a perfectly blood report, but the body could be screaming in terms of pain or in terms of stress that something is wrong. And most people even suppress that with a tablet. And this is not just about marriage. This is not about relationship. Anywhere where you do not have more than two, and I would recommend a minimum of 3 different ways to validate what is going on. And think about this. This is how we are made. You have a left brain and you have a right brain. For a long time, neuroscientists thought that left brain does certain things and right brain does different things. But what they have now understood is that the left brain does all the things that the right brain does, but it does it differently. So, for example, one hemisphere of the brain, if it's processing visual, it takes the smaller units and builds it up. And the other part of the brain, when it's processing visual image, it takes the bigger chunks and finds the smaller units. So they can both arrive at the same information, but they're doing it differently. Why do we have to do that? Why are we created like that? Because it's important to have a continuous validation mechanism. So whatever the left brain processes becomes a feedback for the right hemisphere, and whatever the right hemisphere processes becomes a feedback for the left hemisphere. It's in the design. We are created in a way where you have more than 2 or 3 validation mechanisms. That's true for everything that we achieve in life as well, whether it's about health or relationship. We need to have one way of measuring things, but we need to have another way, a completely different system for measuring things. That keeps us, the closer we are to reality in our understanding of what is happening, the more results we are going to create for each other.
This looks like an ever continuous journey to get there.
It is.
How do you take conversations in general for each person? Like you just took everybody through how it's not a book on body language, or it's not a book of questions that you can learn by heart, or it's not like a model that you can learn like coaching formats and things like that. Because often when you use those kind of coaching formats in conversations, like when people tend to do that, I mean, there's like a different tone and all of that. And, like I've seen like in a lot of houses where there are coaches who've just done coaching certifications, and they find it useful. It's like the children and the wife is just instantly put off saying, oh, don't bring that coaching stuff to my house. Right? So how do you develop this art, this finesse of conversations, of understanding people's deeper
Harini, you're a
intentions.
singer.
Yeah.
And you know about singing.
Yeah.
And more than anyone, you might know how the voice is an instrument that's given to every human. Now imagine someone with the most horrible tone, like, they were smoking and, they were screaming at the water, top of their voice. They never sang a tune in their life. And they sound like, and they have the best music education. They have, like, what are rags, what are scales. Would you ever trust a person like that to go and perform before an audience?
No.
And that's what is happening in the coaching world. That's what's happening in the personal transformation space. The capabilities, the senses, your ability to see, your ability to hear, these are as primary tools for anybody in the business of evolving anyone. Like a voice is for a singer. You won't trust someone with a croaking voice to just learn something from YouTube and some melody to go and perform. But how is it that as a society we accept someone with no calibration skills, no sensory acuity, to pick up a model and go and try to help somebody else? Now, the origin of coaching started with sports and athletics. And the coaches were themselves sportsmen. They had, and most times sportsmen, because of the physical training they go through, they have altered states. They can pay attention. They can hear the shift in the tone of your voice. These are natural abilities that they already have. So when you feel like you're about to take that shot and you feel less confident, they can pay attention using their eyes, and they know that is the moment where you feel less confident. Now you add to them some linguistic capabilities to both listen and ask. It makes a world of a difference. But you just take that linguistic capability and give it to a common man who's not even, like, when they're, who doesn't even know that their spouse hates them. Like, that's how blinded the person is. And you give them a coaching format. What's going to happen? So I have a real strong objection to any format or strategy without assessing the capabilities of the person to see, hear, listen carefully.
Most of the times I see like CXOs or somebody who's very, very seasoned, who's been there, done that, worked with teams, grown businesses, seen all kinds of people. They've had their successes, they've had their failures, they've learned from both, and they're moved by this thought that, okay, I took so many years to get here. Now, what if I can pass my wisdom to the younger ones? And instead of them having to reinvent the wheel and struggle and figure the whole thing out, maybe I can help them. And I've seen a lot of people with some solid depth and background actually doing something. It could be either, they've done some business on their own, or they've, like grown a large organization, or, played the role of a CXO. At least there, we do know that they have some sense of calibration. I mean,
It's different to sit behind a computer and work on Excel sheets or work on softwares or architecture versus working with real human beings. And I think the people who I have seen have real good calibration outside of athletes who are in the top of the game are doctors and medical professionals, because they're seeing so many people, they're seeing patients. You also see, sometimes very interesting. You take a kindergarten teacher, and she's actually dealing with challenges. She's having to deal with a different child, and they all have different things to do. And you teach them one simple coaching model, and then they go and they change their entire family. It's not about, what in the corporate world is a senior position. It's about what position forces you to keep your eyes open about the people around you. So in the corporate world, some people become mentors, and they may have some limited exposure to actually helping people get to the next level. So yeah, that might count. As a society, what we see here without bias is so limited that it takes a lot of personal evolution to even overcome that obstacle. Before I teach, if I were to teach someone, if some people come and ask me, how can I become better at conversational programming or installations, or how can I help someone else? I would say first you got to see and hear better. And I think there are degrees to it. There are things I can't do right now, and I know I could if I could open my eyes more, if I can hear better. And I don't think there is an end point to it. The more good you get at it, the more you actually realize that your sensory acuity of your primary senses, even the sense of smell. They did this research that when you see somebody 1 by 20th of a second, you kind of make an opinion or judgment about that person. Can you trust them? Are they an authority in something? But apparently, the eyes take longer time to perceive that person. Imagine, and I'm not even sure if it's 1 by 20th or 1 by 50th or 1 by 200, but some very small number.
Tiny fraction.
And it's a tiny fraction, and it's faster than the eyes takes to register the information. So how could you understand someone before your eyes can see them? Then you obviously are using some other representation that is faster. And the most obvious guess is the sense of smell. So, and because the smell bypasses, all filters, and it goes straight to the neurocortex. So most people, as humans, we have the capability, and I said this long time ago, and recently it's proved. I said, aren't we the superior species? Wouldn't we have the ability to smell better than dogs? And now neuroscience has proven that we have more number of sensory receptors for smell than dogs do. And what that means is that we are capable, but there are other layers that prevent it. So as humans, when you meet someone, even before your eye catches that reflection of light falling from them and bouncing into your retina, even before that reaches your brain, you formed an opinion of that person, which means we're using other senses. We're using the sense of smell. And imagine if someone's sensory acuity is reduced. They miss on all these incredible abilities we have as human. And these are not even superhuman abilities. We are born with it. And as an adult, most people are so far off from it, so far off, that, they don't have self-calibration, forget external calibration. Like a lot of people wouldn't even know when their stomach feels full. Because now, while people eat, they're not paying attention. A lot of times before people wear spectacles, their eyes start pointing out to them that something is going to go wrong. They feel heaviness there. There are things that happens. And a lot of times we've stopped people. We said, hey, you're getting this. Go check your eyes. And they didn't know it. They come to us for a consultation. We look at them and they say, why don't you go meet an ophthalmologist? And then they go and they say, okay, they have minor power. And I'm like, how do you know? And we're like, it's written all over you. How could you not know? And and the sad part is they have to go to a doctor to recognize that their body is screaming that something is about to happen to their eyes. So then they correct it, thank God, because we found it early for them. This is what we want to improve for people, because if you want to be an evolution artist, you have to start improving the actual hardware, the ability to see, the ability to hear. It's oversimplification to call it actual hardware, but I would say the actual instrument. Now, if voice is an instrument to a singer, and she needs to have, or he needs to have a good voice, and it doesn't matter how much music you know, if you don't have a good voice, you can't be a good singer. For you to be an evolution artist, you need to have good eyes. You need to have good ears. You need to have good sense of smell. You need to have good sense of touch. And then your intuition can do a lot for you. Over the coming episode, I want to talk about predictive intelligence to our audience, because predictive intelligence is our human ability to kind of predict certain outcomes for people, including ours. And it's one of the most exciting thing about being an evolution artist. So, Harini, before we conclude this episode, I just want to answer the question you asked the previous episode. Do you remember what it is?
I think I asked you about evolution artists. Because one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is because we want to bring to people's attention that whether they realize it or not.
What evolution artists learn is how to achieve integrated outcomes. World as a whole, majority of people are stuck in some kind of compromise, where there is a compromise of a family member or a relationship or health, or some compromise their legacy or the impact they can create, because They don't want to compromise on anything else. But there's always a compromise somewhere for most people. And the system is designed to help people stay ordinary. Now, many people are successful, but why are they unfulfilled? Because there's some compromise going somewhere. And when they compromise, it's a trap because most people think they're not compromising. They think that, oh, it's just a little bit here and a little bit there. And eventually it all builds up for people to be, diabetic or to have like thyroid challenges. And, when you take a survey in a group, a large gathering, like who is not using some kind of a lifestyle medication like diabetes or thyroid, and you see less than 20% of people not taking any form of medication. That's just compromise in health. And these are the same people who say I'm not compromising anything. Same thing in their relationship. A lot of families are now staying together because not because there's that intimacy or connection. Okay, it's set up. That the person feel they're already trapped there. It's convenient. And also with career, they found out that all the people who have depression, the majority of people who have depression are because of being in the wrong career. So everybody is making a compromise somewhere or the other. Majority of the world is making a compromise. And that has to do with the systems of the world and authorities and the way things are built right from the top, from the way the governments are run to the organizations, all the way to the local department inside an office. And if you have enough excellence installation specialists in the world, they're likely to bring a change at all the levels. And maybe it becomes easier and more fun for people to do great things to impact humanity without compromising on their health, business, or family.
Wow, that would be such a wonderful world, wouldn't it be?
It would be.
The A&H Podcast.